When it comes to Kirby games, there's little doubt that the current modern style began with Kirby's Return to Dreamland. Directed by Shinya Kumazaki, with the help of a whole team of veteran Kirby developers, this Kirby game is a culmination of the best features of the series' legacy. And the formula continues on in Triple Deluxe, Planet Robobot, and Star Allies. One thing Kumazaki loves doing in his games is referencing older titles, be it through cameos, nods, or direct level design callbacks. And I mean, he really loves to do it. Kumazaki's games are filled to the brim with references and returning elements that make longtime Kirby fans overjoyed, some of which you probably wouldn't even have realized. So in this video, I'll be going over as many references and trivia as I can possibly find in the first game to start the trend: Kirby's Return to Dreamland, or Kirby's Adventure Wii in PAL regions. The game really lives up to its North American namesake, as there are a ton of familiar things inside that make it a true Return to Dreamland. There's a lot of cool stuff to talk about, so grab a snack, sit back, and let's dive into a plethora of nerdy Kirby goodness. The first thing to note happens right before the title even appears on screen. The opening sequence starts off with the camera focused on the HAL Laboratory and Nintendo logos, before quickly pulling away to catch Kirby flying on a warp star. This could easily be brushed off as nothing, but it actually references the same thing done in the opening sequence of Kirby Air Ride. Speaking of the title of the game, as I've mentioned, Kirby's Return to Dreamland is called Kirby's Adventure Wii in PAL regions. While the game is obviously not a Wii version of the original Kirby's Adventure, as the name might imply, you'll see in this video that it has a ton of references to the NES game, so the name is fitting enough. The Japanese title is simply Hoshinokabi Wii, Hoshinokabi being the franchise name rather than just Kirby. However, according to Shinya Kumazaki via an old Miiverse post celebrating the game's 4th anniversary, Kirby Wii Super Friends was a tentative title for the game. He explains that this title would have invoked a feeling of adventuring with friends, while also tying in with the super abilities found in-game. The opening cinematic starts off with a glimpse of another usual day in Dreamland. Kirby is being chased by King Dedede and Waddle Dee, who are perhaps in pursuit of that slice of cake held in his hands. The cake is a strawberry shortcake, which is a nice little nod to Kirby Squeak Squad, where that game's plot practically revolves around it. All of a sudden, the sky flashes and a star-shaped portal opens up, from which the Lord Starcutter emerges. These kinds of portals make a regular appearance throughout the game, and are similar to the ones made by the Crystal Shards in Kirby 64 that bring the game to the next planet. The lore crash lands and Kirby and his friends meet Magolor, and when Kirby steps up to offer help, he does a little hop and confidently pats his chest. The very same gesture he used in Kirby 64 as well, when helping out Ribbon. He does this again later on, after the lore is attacked by Landia too. The planet of Popstar is once again the main setting of the game, with a new area on each of its 5 points, taking a page from Kirby's Dreamland 3, the first game in the series to do this. Furthermore, Dreamland 3 and Return to Dreamland share the same level themes on the planet: grass, water, desert, sky, and ice. Each level also has their own little hub room where stages are entered through a numbered door. This structure is taken from Kirby's Adventure, albeit without the extra stuff like museums and subgames, as those are now located inside the lore. The level names even hide a secret. Besides being alliteratively named after different foods, lining up the first letter of each level will spell "crowned," foreshadowing the events of the story. Some other languages have their own spin on it too. In the French version, the level names spell parfait, meaning perfect. And in the Latin American Spanish version, it's coronar, meaning to crown. This acronym-based naming scheme has been a continuing trend with Kumazaki's games, but Kirby's Adventure was the first game to do it. In that game, the level names spell out Vibgyor, which is backwards for Roy G. Biv. Kirby Canvas Curse does this as well, with its levels spelling out the word rainbow. And speaking of Kirby Canvas Curse, that game's training mode introduces the basics with this ding-dong sound effect. Similarly, before you start the first stage from Return to Dreamland, you'll be reminded that you can play with friends at any time with a very similar ding-dong, which plays again when you recover your first energy sphere. So now we've made it to our first destination, Cookie Country, the typical World 1 grassland level of the game. In these environments, you'll come across these strange-looking pillar things that stick up from the ground. Whatever these things are exactly, they've been around since the original Kirby's Dream Land, and have gone on to be a staple in the grassy fields of Pop Star. Another thing you'll find in Cookie Country is this big old tree with windmill-like leaves. I personally always found this thing really cool, and the very same concept can be found in Kirby Air Ride, where you race straight through one of them in Fantasy Meadows. The leaves on this one are more like insect wings, but the inspiration is still clear. But perhaps the most recurring environmental elements you'll encounter are pop flowers. These little flowers can be found popping up throughout the game, and adapt to the environment by changing form and shape. Pop flowers not only adapt to the environment, but also the character you play as. So you might think that their petals are always pink, but that's just because of Kirby. Purple petals will bloom for Meta Knight, red for King Dedede, orange for Waddle Dee, and each different colored Kirby's respective color. Anyways, now for some level design inspiration. In Stage 2, you'll arrive in this room that looks like you're inside of a tree. A needle ability has senses to the right, and a needle house is minding its own business further up. This concept originated from Kirby's Adventure in Stage 4 of Vegetable Valley, where you would also enter a tree to find the needle-granting Togazu. Nightmare in Dreamland, the remake of Kirby's Adventure, makes this reference even more evident with the introduction of Needle House. There are a lot of secrets and hidden areas to find throughout the game, and Stage 4 of Cookie Country just so happens to have one in its first room. Ignoring the door at the end and reaching the edge of the screen, you can head back to find that a big chunk of land has mysteriously dropped, opening a secret door in the tall grass. Going inside, you'll find yourself in this room. Hal is spelled out in star blocks with a little broom hatter sweeping dust off of the L. Another one of these Hal rooms can be found in Stage 5 of Egg Engines too. So, what's the deal with these structures? The obvious answer is that HAL Laboratory is the developer of Kirby games, which is where the letters come from. The room itself first appeared in Kirby's Adventure. By glitching a warp star out of existence in Stage 2 of Vegetable Valley, you could go beyond the intended boundary of the room and find the HAL room stashed away, complete with the broom hatter too. It wasn't until Kirby Superstar Ultra where it could be found again by normal means, by entering the secret entrance in Revenge of the King's Illusion Islands. After fighting Mr. TikTok, the HAL room awaits. While we're on the subject of the HAL room, an arrangement of the classic Kirby song Green Greens plays in both of them. Take a listen. What's special about this arrangement is this part of the latter half of the song. The instrument used for that specific part matches the trumpet-like instrument used in Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland's arrangement of Green Greens. A neat little tidbit, if nothing else. At the end of every stage, you'll play a quick little goal game of flinging Kirby as high as you can through different tiers of clouds. This is taken directly from Kirby's Adventure and Nightmare in Dreamland, complete with a UFO that gives you goodies. But here's the cool thing. In the original, if you land a 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and then 1 all in a row, you'll be treated to 30 extra lives instead of just 1. And if you manage to pull off the same thing and return to Dreamland, sure enough. To wrap up Cookie Country in true Kirby fashion, the first boss of the game is none other than Wispy Woods. There isn't too much here out of the ordinary, but if you're playing Extra Mode or the True Arena, you'll face Wispy Woods EX instead. With purple leaves and a darker trunk, you might as well just call him Wispy's Revenge, as he's basically the same enemy returning from Kirby Superstar Ultra. In that game, he could spit tornadoes from his mouth, and spin around to drop enemies. Both attacks are retained in Return to Dreamland. One new attack Wispy Wood's EX can do, though, is shooting up his roots from the ground like this. Something Wispy first did in Kirby's Dreamland 2. When you finally defeat him, he'll shrink in size, but some things will never change, as he'll still shed that single tear. Before I move on, I think now would be a good time to touch upon a few animations. As you've probably noticed, Return to Dreamland is a good-looking game, and there's a lot of extra polish all around, including the animation department. For example, just look at the utter despair this Cappy exhibits when Kirby eats his cap. Anyways, let's look at Kirby's idle stances. When Kirby's left alone, he'll sway his arms, do a big stretch, survey the surroundings, and sit on the ground, tapping his little feet. This last one is actually lifted straight from Kirby 64. Leave him alone in that game and he'll do the same thing. On top of this though, all of these animations can be found in the Kirby's Dreamland puzzle of the Street Past Me Plaza on 3DS. Also in this puzzle is an angry battle stance, a waving gesture, and this happy pose, which is similar to another one in Return to Dreamland. You'll also notice a parasol Waddle Dee floating around in the puzzle. And sure enough, the same animation is used in Return to Dreamland. The puzzle using assets from Return to Dreamland makes sense as it predates the game by a few months, likely being developed at the same time. As for the rest of the gang, Waddle Dee shares the same idle stances as Kirby because of their similar stature. Meta Knight is fascinated by his sword. Dedede, however, is where things really shine. For one, his allergies seem to be flaring up over the course of the game. Oh, bless you! But truly, the best first impression is given on the title screen. just watch. Look at that! So much personality! Dedede making funny faces and laughing at Kirby's bewilderment. Waddle Dee laughing too because he's Dedede's crony after all. And you can just feel Meta Knight's embarrassment when he realizes he's stuck with these goofballs for a whole adventure. When he all waved though, despite how much he doesn't want to show it, yep, he's in there for the ride. Okay, moving on to the scorching sands of Level 2, Raisin Ruins. In the first stage of the level, you'll come across this room, being greeted by two flamers circling some floating chunks of land. This setup is similar to another one from Kirby's Adventure, found in Stage 3 of Vegetable Valley. In this room of Stage 3, you'll meet a Starman, the enemy that grants the high jump ability. And above you is a checkerboard of star blocks that you can tackle your way through. This setup could be a truncated version of this room in, yet again, Kirby's Adventure, in Stage 5 of Ice Cream Island. There's also a similar room in Stage 1 of Jam Jungle in Kirby Squeak Squad. Further on up is a bunch of cannons you'll need to shoot yourself out of, and there's a couple things to note about this bit of the stage. For one, the layout of these cannons match the layout of the ones in this part of Superstar's Great Cave Offensive. You'll also blast Scarfies and Brontoberts out of the way while collecting star pieces. Shooting in the right direction will net you an energy sphere as well. With these points, this room also seems to take influence from the second stage of Shiverstar in Kirby 64. Stage 4 immediately presents a key to you, and when picked up, these red Scarfies will demon up and start chasing after Kirby, as long as he's holding the key. With a floating ball of nightmares and keys, it's hard not to think of the Phantos from Super Mario Bros. 2, who also get angry when their key is picked up. Upon arrival at Onion Ocean, you're treated with this remix of Kind's theme from Kirby's Dream Land 2. And as you're listening to it, you'll hop on a warp star to the next area, but the way it travels should look a little familiar to those who played Kirby's Adventure. In Stage 2 of Vegetable Valley, a warp star will take you further into the level by jumping platform to platform. And this is replicated in Return to Dreamland. The level also introduces this boot item in Stage 2, and like the Scarfies from earlier, it's kinda hard not to make more Mario connections, as this is similar to the Goomba's shoe from Super Mario Bros. 3. Onion Ocean's boss is this guy named Fatty Puffer, a reference to the Superstar boss Fatty Whale. And it makes you wonder just what's in the ocean that's making all these sea creatures become fat. Anyways, the similarities end with their name though, as they're completely different in how they fight. But if we want to talk about new enemies that are similar to old ones, Return to Dreamland is definitely not short on those. Quite a few regular enemies behave almost exactly like some from Kirby's Dream Land 3. So here's a side-by-side comparison. Klain pops up from the ground like Oro. Shelled has protective armor and cowardly runs away when it's broken like Gabon. Cerulean glides around, loosely homing in on Kirby and bouncing off walls like Terran. Krabby does a little dance like Connie. And Barracuda can latch onto Kirby like Joe the Shark. There's also this enemy in Kirby 64 called Flora, whose behavior and looks are similar to Leafan. In addition, there's an unused enemy left in the game's internal files called Hearbell, a floral enemy that's been partially animated. Based on these animations, it seems like it would have behaved like Lovely from Kirby Superstar, another flower enemy that attacks Kirby by grabbing him in its petals. Some bosses also have attacks and behavior based on previous enemies, but I'll talk about them as we move along. As you move through the White Wafers tundra, shooting yourself from cannons, you'll notice that you're being fed an awful lot of bananas. And it really becomes evident when you're shot into the secret area. This isn't a Kirby reference, but a Donkey Kong Country reference of all things. In those games, you practically can't go 2 seconds without being shot from barrel cannons and collecting bananas. Stage 5 has a couple minor things related to Waddle Dees. For one, Wapods, originating from Kirby's Dream Land 3, no longer have arms, which I know is probably the most mind-blowing thing in this video. But there's also this pair of living Waddle Dees enjoying each other's company, with no intent on attacking you or anything. Could be a coincidence, but they're similar to these Waddle Dees in Kirby's Epic Yarn who fell asleep with each other. But going back to the monkey theme this level has going on, the boss of White Wafers is a gorilla Goliath named Goriath. His main point of interest is during the second phase of the battle. When you wither his health down to half, he'll flare up and have wicked golden hair. If this doesn't sound familiar already, you probably haven't heard of this guy before. These past few levels might have been a little short on references, but that's all about to change now that we're here in Nutty Noon. In this level, you'll start by climbing a hill and taking the warp star into the skies above. But if you ignore the warp star, a hidden Paracel copy essence is on the other side for players who leave no stone unturned. The opening of this stage is reminiscent of the second stage of Shiver Star in Kirby 64, which also has you climb up a hill to be shot into the skies by a Z-Bon. Furthermore, on the other side of that hill is a hidden treasure in the form of a lone star piece. Throughout the game, and especially in these beautiful sunset levels of Nutty Noon, there are these switch handles that you pull to open doors and activate other things. and I can't help but to think of the ones from Kirby Mass Attack. Since these games were developed at the same time though, there's either some design overlap or it's all just a coincidence. Anyways, after a quick battle with Moundo in Stage 2, you'll come across 3 wooden stakes, with an energy sphere trapped behind a wall underneath. Start pounding them with the stone ability and the walls will crumble, but become tempted by the third one and you'll be locked out of your prize. Similar versions of this setup actually have a history in the Kirby series, as an intentional recurring thing or not. Kirby Superstar uses this setup with bomb blocks in this part of the Great Cave Offensive, except it's the second one that blocks you from getting the treasure. And in Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, this time it's the third one that blocks you from entering a door in Moonlight Mansion. As Nutty Noon is a sky-themed level, let's talk about its relationship to another one in the Kirby series. Level 4 of Kirby's Adventure is Grape Garden, and as you bounce around through its clouds, you'll be listening to this waltz. Return to Dreamland has a beautiful new arrangement of this song in a couple levels of Nutty Noon. Not only that, but in this room of Stage 4, the only pieces of food you'll find lying around are bunches of grapes. Kind of a cool subtle detail that I've never noticed until my recent playthrough. Now, Stage 5 is none other than the ominous mid-boss tower. In it, you'll progressively work your way to the top, stopping to fight a different mid-boss on each floor. And if you're feeling up for a challenge, you can enter the barred-off window at the beginning to fight even more mid-bosses, rewarding you with a bunch of 1-ups at the end. This stage is once again a callback to one in Kirby's Adventure, as the second stage in Rainbow Resort was the mid-boss tower's debut. Return to Dreamland's version more closely resembles that of Nightmare in Dreamland, however, as the two share more of the same visual and audio elements not found in the original Kirby's Adventure, like the iron bars indicating the secret entrance, the sloped floors in between the mid-boss rooms, the windy ambience outside of the tower, and the music being King Dedede's theme. To further drive the reference home, there's a Maxim Tomato at the end of the stage, and that 1-up stash at the end of the alternate route. Both, of course, found in the source material as well. But wait, there's more! Kirby's Dream Land 3 also has a mid-boss tower, and should you want to get the Heart Star prize at the end, you'll need to collect a fairy's feathers. To do this, you'll have to use each mid-boss's respective copy ability in the room following their battle, to break blocks that can only be broken by that ability. Return to Dreamland's mid-boss tower takes some inspiration from this, as you won't be able to get the energy spheres without the ability of the mid-boss you just fought. At the highest point of Nutty Noon, you'll climb a tower with shot sows installed on the outsides. A neat set of decorations, sure, but there's no doubt that is a direct reference to the tower you climb before fighting King Dedede in Kirby's Dream Land 2, where there are also shot sows on the outer walls. After that, you're lured into a false sense of victory by supposedly getting the last of the lore's ship parts, but the victory theme takes a turn. As an intentional reference or not, a similar situation happens in Kirby's Epic Yarn when you beat Yin Yarn. Anyways, Grandoomer is indeed the boss of Nutty Noon, whether Kirby likes it or not. This guy has a lot of references to past bosses in the Kirby series. For starters, Grandoomer does this thing where he rapidly teleports all around the screen sometimes. This is something other bosses in the Kirby series like to do, particularly final bosses like Nightmare and Marks. Also similar to Marks is when Grandoomer lurks in the shadows on the ground to try and attack Kirby from below. But the cooler part of Grandoomer is that he has a couple attacks that are lifted directly from Dracia's soul, the final boss of Kirby Canvas Curse. In that game, she would hang out in the background most of the time, until one attack where she starts bouncing, and slamming into the foreground. When Grandoomer envelops himself in stone, he'll spawn enemies, head into the background, and do that same attack. Furthermore, when you fight Grandoomer EX in Extra Mode or the True Arena, you'll notice that he also does this big fireball sweep attack. Sure enough, that's taken from Dracia's soul as well. Our next stop is in another dimension on the planet Halcandra. But first, another quick detour. The first time Return to Dreamland was revealed was through a short video shown in a financial briefing on Nintendo's Japanese website only about 9 months before its release. It was later given a proper trailer during E3 of that year under the name Kirby Wii. And there were a lot of minor adjustments made in the game between the announcements and the game's full release. So I thought it'd be fun to real quickly compare the beta footage to the final product. Let's start with that initial blurry reveal footage. In the first scene, Kirby crashes down into this part of what we now know as Stage 2 of Cookie Country. Right away, we can see that some of the tree canopies in the background have been moved in the final version. But also, it sounds like the music is continuing on from when Kirby was riding the Warp Star, where in the final game, the song doesn't start until entering the room. In this scene of Cookie Country Stage 4, these falling stone pillars were originally pretty stiff and unanimated, and would explode into dust when they hit the ground. They were made a lot more wobbly and bulbous in the final, and explode into smaller rocks when they crash down. As you might know in the final game, a little cutscene happens when you use a super ability for the first time. This is shown off in the reveal footage, except the weapon he uses is the scimitar instead of the classic Ultra Sword. This might imply that the scimitar was going to be Ultra Sword Kirby's default weapon, instead of just one of many he pulls out to attack. Also, Waddle Dees and Puppet Waddle Dees originally had a much redder hue than the orange ones in the final game. So in this scene, listen closely to the background music. For one, it's different than the Sphere Doomer Dimension's final music. But that original song still ended up in the final game. As it turns out, it's actually a song that plays in Stage 4 of Egg Engines. Here's that scene in the reveal footage spliced in with the final song. And finally, in the room before Mr. Deuter's boss fight, there was originally a line of enemies on the final slope, absent in the final version. The E3 trailer starts with a peek at the opening cinematic. where Kirby has a blank face in the original while smiling in the final. And the strawberry shortcake was spruced up a lot more, as a lot more frosting falls off of it in the final when it's bumped out of Kirby's hands. The scene where the gang approaches the lore was completely flipped horizontally too. During actual gameplay, we can see quite a few changes made to the HUD that were also present in the reveal footage. It was given a facelift after E3, with the icons notably having colored outlines in the final instead of black ones. The health bar at the bottom shows Kirby's face, which originally had larger features and a little star in the corner, not in the final version, while the bar itself was made flatter and given a lighter right half. In a scene where Kirby cuts this giant rope, the rope did not originally have tiny stars on it that indicate that it's a breakable environment piece. During boss fights, the boss's health bar was originally blue and just said boss instead of their actual names. Like in the opening cinematic, Kirby is given more expression when being sucked into a dimensional portal. And in the Sphere Doomer dimension, the signpost that teaches Kirby how to super inhale was given a concrete star block for more clarity. You'll also notice that the green checkmark that appears on the sign was originally a red circle. This is actually a change made just for the international releases of the game. Circles are more commonly used in place of checkmarks in Japan and is still found in the final Japanese version. The sparkling effect when another player joins in hasn't been implemented yet, as shown by Meta Knight, who just sort of pops in. Dedede's running animation was originally a lot slower than it is in the final, and he also didn't originally wear goggles underwater. Finally, Waddle Dee didn't have his bandana on and his icon at the bottom yet. As far as the playable E3 demo goes, there's a lot more minor differences to find, mainly due to elements not being implemented yet, or because the demo stages were amalgamations of different stages from the final version. Because of this, I won't be saying too much about it, but one thing I did find interesting is that in what we now know as Egg Engines Stage 4, there was originally a Maxim Tomato guarded by 2 concrete star blocks at the very end, completely absent in the final version. I guess that explains why it looks so empty. Oh, and I guess I should touch upon some cut content while we're here. Like we saw with Herebell earlier, Return to Dreamland has its fair share of unused content left in the internal files. And what particularly sticks out are these graphics for abilities not meant to be. These two look like they were for scrapped super abilities based on Spark and Cutter, because of their sharp, pointed stars that super abilities have in-game. The potential Super Cutter ability even has a fully modeled hat. This ability graphic, on the other hand, might imply that a clock or time-based ability was considered at one point. However, these are evidently used as dummy normal abilities to revert Kirby back to normal. Also left in the game's files are lots of early versions of different music tracks, like this early Sky Tower you've been listening to. And what sounds like an early version of White Wafers 5. Those are the main points, but we'll be looking back at more of the unreleased history in just a bit. Before that though, we're moving on to Halcandra, with Hal clearly being in the planet's name, once again referencing the developers of the game. It could also be derived from one in the novel Out of the Silent Planet, called Malacandra. In the novel, Malacandra is the native name for the planet Mars, so this could also explain Halcandra's craggy environments and red color. The first level on this planet, Egg Engines, is a big factory-themed level, and holds a few references to a certain other famous Kirby factory. In Kirby 64, The Crystal Shards, there's an eerie factory of some sort on the planet Shiverstar. Creepy music aside, you'll eventually hitch a ride on King Dedede, who will take you through a hallway of giant hammers that slam into the ground with a toothy grin on their faces. Back in Egg Engines, you'll come across similar but toothless giant hammers that try to flatten you in the same way. although they explode immediately afterwards. In the second room of the first stage, there are lots of sleep copy ability essences scattered around in some rather unfortunate places. Especially here, where not even the floor crumbling to Kirby's doom will stop his urge to take a nap. This isn't the first time sleep essences have been used as obstacles though. In Kirby Superstar's Great Cave Offensive, you'll come across a windy tunnel littered with sleep essences, requiring some tricky jumping in order to get the treasure. Grab one of them and you'll be pushed all the way back to the beginning as Kirby sleeps his troubles away. Later on, you'll get to this room in Stage 2. The Flamers and Elec enemies crawling around in this 4-sectional layout is definitely a callback to one room in Stage 4 of Rainbow Resort in Kirby's Adventure. Stage 4, as we saw earlier, takes place in the sewers and pipelines of Egg Engines. The point of interest here is, once again, this song that plays in a few rooms. Take a listen to the melody in the first part of the song, though. This is what I consider to be a signature of Jun Ishikawa, one of the game's composers. It was used twice before in the series, starting in this song in Kirby's Dream Land 3, and returning in Kirby 64 in the bass line of this song. Ishikawa composed for both of these games as well, so this little piece of music is a welcome addition to a game already filled with old Kirby references. The boss of Egg Engines is Metal General, a robotic enemy that wields a sword, having some movement vaguely similar to Meta Knight battles of the past. More interesting than that, though, is the fact that every time you attack the guy, a number pops out that tells you how much damage you've inflicted. No other Kirby boss has done this before, but something similar happens with Computer Virus, a boss from Kirby Superstar. Much like a classic turn-based RPG, you'll have a chance to deal damage every time the enemy hops off their window. At the end of your turn, the total amount of damage you've dealt will be detailed in the window above. Perhaps Metal General's number quirk is a slight nod to Computer Virus. If you're playing Extra Mode or the True Arena though, Metal General won't be going down too easily. When you beat him, he'll take to the cockpit of a giant robot called HRD3. And I gotta say, this blew my mind when I first played the game. This guy's originally from a cancelled Kirby game on the GameCube as a Dedede robot, as seen in one scene of its short gameplay trailer that shows a boss battle against it. The concept of this guy was lost in time with the game, but was eventually revived in Kirby Mass Attack, where it was a boss in the sub-game Kirby Quest. It could even use the same devastating laser beam it used on poor Bonkers in the GameCube game's trailer. Anyways, the Dedede robot returns again in Return to Dreamland, just with a new coat of paint from Metal General. It can once again shoot its Destructo laser, but interestingly, the more damage you cause to it, the more the armor will fall off, exposing the skeleton of the machine and other insides. This may just be a parallel to the same thing that happens to the Dedede robot in the Scope Shot subgame, but I like to think that the battle damage was part of the original concept as well, as this piece of concept art specifically depicts the inner workings. The name HRD3 holds a lot of significance as well. Of course, D3 is a reference to King Dedede, of whom the robot was based off of in the first place. but HR is a callback to a boss in Kirby 64 called HRH, later turning into HRE. I don't think it's ever really stated what the HR stands for, but either way, it's a cool nod to a fellow Kirby hunting robot. The similarities don't even end there though, as both of the battles have two phases. One where they fight from the background, and another where they hop into the foreground plane. Their first phases share some similar attacks as well, specifically the side-sweeping laser beam, and the missiles. Let's sidetrack ourselves a little bit more and talk about that cancelled GameCube Kirby game, as there's little doubt that it's evolved into the Kirby's Return to Dreamland we have today. An Iwata Asks article was released around the time the game came out, and revealed the gradual process of this transformation. It's an interesting read, as the game went through 3 different incarnations, but the similarities become more apparent when you dissect some elements of the final game. The most obvious thing is one of my favorite details about the game. The short original trailer of the GameCube game played this dynamic song. A lot of Return to Dreamland's music directly uses riffs of this trailer theme. You could say that the trailer theme became the main theme of the game itself. Even more, the full version of the original song can be heard in the arena, as both the title theme and the battle theme. Another relic from the original GameCube game is the piggyback feature. When you're playing with friends, it's possible to hop on another's back and make them carry you around, and even stack up all 4 players to be one big totem pole of Kirby friends. This mechanic isn't shown in the original trailer, but multiple screenshots show it in action. One piece of official art depicts it as well. The GameCube Kirby game was originally shown to include a wide variety of areas to explore, and it might surprise you to know that many of those backgrounds actually made their way into the final game. The background of Onion Ocean Stage 1 features swirling palm trees and arched cliff sides. And this section in particular looks like it came straight from the beach level shown in the GameCube game's trailer. In the arena, you'll fight the mid-bosses in this canyon-like battlefield. The background in this area uses some of the same geometry from this screenshot, specifically the precarious stone pillar. And if we use some tools to move the camera around, the train tracks in the foreground and the bridge up top are hiding there too. The same stone pillar can also be found in the KO screen when pulling back the camera. A few other noteworthy backgrounds are the ones from the mid-boss battlefield of the True Arena, the rest area from the arena, and the final part of Stage 5 of Nutty Noon. All of these backgrounds files in the game, as well as the 2 others I talked about, are labeled with GCK in their names, implying that they were all taken from the GameCube Kirby game. When I talked about HRD3, I showed this piece of concept art. It's actually one of many from the game that were officially published in the Kirby 20th Anniversary Encyclopedia, which had a page on the GameCube Kirby game. A lot of these ideas seem to be left unused, But interestingly, there is one other piece of concept art that depicts this big, octopus-like creature peering from underneath a sunken ship. Look familiar? In Stage 3 of Onion Ocean, you'll encounter a similar big, octopus-like creature that peers from underneath a sunken ship. Just without the beak and as grandiose of tentacles the original had. Oh, and another piece of concept art depicts this menacing character, whom I think we can all agree was the precursor to Magolor because of his similar traits. By introducing the modern style of Kirby games, Return to Dreamland redesigned some copyability hats as well, particularly ones that were too similar to others, or some that just needed a modern look. Bomb Kirby's hat was redesigned to look more like a party popper, and Stone Kirby's hat is now a clump of rocks. These redesigns can also be traced back to the GameCube Kirby game, where it shows off Bomb Kirby with an orange party popper hat, and Stone Kirby with a hat with a clump of rocks. As a side note, the trailer also showed Hammer Kirby wearing a new hard hat, but the original headband was left unchanged in Return to Dreamland. The GameCube Kirby game trailer also marked the first appearance of Water Kirby being in a game. The ability previously debuted in the Kirby Right Back At Ya anime as a fan-made ability designed by a contest winner, and the GameCube game would have used the same design. Ultimately, the ability received the same fate as the other two I talked about, but the new design certainly shares some elements of the original. Also, as a side note, Water Kirby in the GameCube game trailer was shown using a unique bubbly attack that the ability doesn't have in Return to Dreamland, which would actually be repurposed in a way for the bubble ability in Kirby Squeak Squad. And finally, one incredibly minor thing. With the introduction of copyability hats in Kirby Superstar, Kirby is also given goggles and a snorkel to wear underwater. Kirby kept the snorkel part in most games to follow, but only wore the goggles in the cancelled GameCube game as seen in this screenshot. Perhaps as another relic of the GameCube game, Return to Dreamland is the first released Kirby game where he just wears his goggles with no snorkel. Regardless, I think it's a nice change, as using a snorkel when completely submerged wouldn't really do much anyway. The final level of the game is fittingly named after the final meal of the day, Dangerous Dinner! Despite its imposing volcanic environment, there's not too much in this level as it only has 3 stages. But they still hold a few tidbits. Toward the end of Stage 2, you'll take the Grand Hammered super ability to this part of the room, where you start to pound some pegs on a big structure based on a lizard. If you're curious as to why there's this random lizard statue in the depths of the volcano, well, salamanders have roots in a number of myths and folklore as a creature that can withstand extreme heat and fire. You see this in a lot of games from Japan, like Charmander from Pokemon, or the Candlemander from Kirby's Epic Yarn. Stage 3 has you slicing your way through mid-bosses left and right like a madman. But don't let the excitement let you finish the level too soon. Before you enter the goal, it might be a good idea to look above it first. There's a whole lot of emptiness, but in the middle is a small planetoid. Turns out you'll actually be able to enter it as if it were a door, leading you to a little bonus room that you fall through for some goodies. This was a recurring thing in older Kirby games, starting with the very first one. Entering the Crescent Moon at the end of Bubbly Clouds will take you to a bonus room chute too. Kirby's Adventure and its remake have a level based on Kirby's Dream Land, so it's only natural that the Moon Door is at the end of its Bubbly Cloud segment. Superstar continues the trend in Spring Breeze with its Bubbly Cloud segment too. To be expected, Landia's volcanic domain is at the end of Dangerous Dinner. There isn't too much to talk about with this battle, but there are a couple things that might remind you of another dragon in the Kirby series. At some point, Landia will fly in the corner and flap his wings, causing these air slashes and wind to push you back. This attack might be a callback to one used by the Red Dragon from Kirby Superstar's computer virus boss, where the text even describes it as flapping its wings. But that's not all. In Kirby Superstar Ultra, the Red Dragon's name was changed to be the Great Dragon, due to some bosses being given multiple color palettes. While the Great Dragon is orange in most appearances, he turns purple in Helper to Hero. Likewise, regular Landia is orange, and Landia EX is purple. Nearing the climax of the gang chases down Magolor in another dimension with the help of Landia. This whole part is a Gradius-styled shooter, much different than the rest of the game. More specifically though, it's influenced by the last part of Milky Way Wishes from Kirby Superstar, where in that game, Kirby sets off to take down Nova from the inside in a shooting segment. The similarities to this are apparent in another dimension, and they even have similar enemies. Oh, and while Kirby and the starship violently explode upon losing all HP in Superstar, they instead slowly crash land off screen in Superstar Ultra. This is how Landia prefers to go as well. Shooting bosses are pretty common throughout the Kirby series, and the Lore Star Cutter fits right in with the others. Besides being able to attack using the ship parts you've been collecting throughout the entire game, a lot of its regular bullet patterns are lifted straight from other bosses, like Boola's 3-bullet spread shot. When its health reaches the halfway point, it'll do these attacks. 4 balls of energy that shoot in a straight line, and then home in on Kirby. This is also an attack that Nightmare Orb from Kirby's Adventure does. Early in the fight, the 4 bullets will shoot straight, and later on they'll home in on Kirby. After that, the Lore will tackle off screen and start shooting bullets from the background. Which is also something Zero did with its blood spurts in Kirby's Dream Land 3. After all that's been said and done, at last we've reached the final boss, Magolor! Yep, the guy Kirby and the gang helped out at the beginning was only using them to steal the Master Crown from Landia all along. This isn't the first time Kirby fell for someone's traitorous tricks though. In Kirby Superstar's Milky Way Wishes, Marx asks Kirby to summon the wish-granting comet Nova, in hopes that it would stop the Sun and Moon from fighting. But when the time comes to make that wish, Marx boots Kirby out of the way and wishes to conquer Popstar instead. These two stories have quite the similar premise, so you could say that Marx and Magolor have a lot in common. But there's more than that, as it's possible that Magolor and Marx even know each other. Throughout the game, you can check into the lore and chat with Magolor. He'll praise you for your efforts, and get annoyed when you talk too much. But right before fighting Landia, only in extra mode, he'll say some pretty interesting stuff. In one line, after saying he knew Kirby before coming to Popstar, he'll say, "I even know somebody who knows you quite well. There may even be some folks here who have fought with you before." Now, granted, this could be any one of Kirby's foes, but when he talks about how the lore is constructed, he'll say this. This same power gave rise to clockwork stars that soar the cosmos. Mysterious items that can bring dreams to life. This is most certainly an allusion to Nova, as it is a giant comet with clockwork aspects that can grant wishes, so maybe that makes the link to Marx more apparent. But if you want even more connections to Marx, prepare yourself. Let's get battling! Magolor can use 2 specific attacks lifted straight from Marx. A humongo laser beam that sweeps the bottom half of the arena, and the famous black hole. For this one, it's easy enough to keep running to the side to avoid getting sucked in, but fail to do that and Kirby will be brought to this hellscape of a dimension and take massive damage. Magolor made sure to do the same trick with his black hole. He can also pull these magic spikes from the ground. which is similar to the spike attack Drossia can summon in Kirby Canvas Curse. In Extra Mode, however, these spikes will look more like thorns, which look remarkably similar to Zero Two's cactus-like tail. Functionality-wise, it's possible that these thorns could further bring the Marks motif home, as Marks will sometimes plant these tall, thorny stalks. Anyways, with a slice of victory, the Master Crown takes full control over Magolor and morphs him into his second form. And the first thing you'll notice is that he has a big ol' smile on his face. You think he's just happy to see you, but looks can be deceiving, as it's later revealed that his smile is actually his true cycloptic eye. If a big orb of darkness with one eye doesn't immediately remind you of dark matter, that faux smile might remind you of someone else, as it's a callback to the final boss of Kirby 64, Zero Two. In Extra Mode and the true arena, this form's colors are much cooler and his iris is visible a lot more often. This version is called Magolor Soul, which continues the tradition of Soul final bosses in the series, coming after Drossia Soul and Marks Soul. Also, like Grandoomer from before, in true Kirby final boss fashion, both of Magolor's forms like to rapidly teleport as well. Defeating the second phase releases Magolor from control of the Master Crown. This scene was planned to only happen if the player gathered every single energy sphere, according to Kumazaki in that Miiverse post I shared earlier. The scene was deemed too important to leave out of the main story though. Oh, and one more thing. It should be noted that regular old Magolor looks a tiny bit like this little guy from Kirby's Dream Land 3 called Madu, who also wears a hood and has floaty hands. Phew, that's a ton of stuff! How we doing? Still with me? Well, don't leave yet. We may have reached the end of the game, but there's still even more to talk about. Our first stop is the credits. It's a feel-good closure to the game with triumphant music. Appropriately titled, what else then? Returning to Dreamland. The camera slowly pans upward from the fields of Dreamland into the skies and space above. This sequence is directly lifted from Kirby Superstar, but more specifically, its remake, Superstar Ultra, as that game added pictures of scenes throughout the game, which are, of course, in Return to Dreamland 2. While these little Kirby icons appear in the credits of the original Superstar, they're notably absent in Superstar Ultra's credits, and won't appear until after Revenge of the King. Similarly, in Return to Dreamland, the regular game's credits don't have the icons, but they will appear in the credits of Extra Mode. Almost all of Return to Dreamland's icons are updated versions of the originals. The new ones that Superstar Ultra introduced are there too. Oh, and check this out. This icon used for the public relations and artwork sections depict Kirby holding a plush of himself, as well as a copy of Kirby Superstar Ultra. Ain't that meta? Once the main game is finished, a new adventure called Extra Mode will be unlocked. As I've alluded to throughout the video, Extra Mode takes you through these same levels and story, but is overall a lot tougher of an experience. Extra Mode is a concept that can be traced back to the extra game of Kirby's Dream Land, where you'll play through the same story and levels, only with tougher, remixed enemies. Kirby's Adventure also featured an extra game, only this time the difficulty comes from your vitality being half of what it normally is, and the inability to save your game. While its remake, Nightmare Dreamland, kept the half vitality in its extra mode, this game was nice enough to let you save your file, and even kept track of a separate completion percent. Return to Dreamland borrows elements from all of these different extra modes with its own, slicing the vitality in half, featuring tougher, remixed EX bosses, and a separate completion percentage. Next up is the Ninja Dojo subgame. There's not a lot to the game itself, but on the title screen, this song plays. The thing about this song is that it lines up almost perfectly with the minigame theme from Kirby's Dream Land 3. Both are even in C major. Once again, Jun Ishikawa composed the music for Dreamland 3 and Return to Dreamland, so this is either intentional or just Ishikawa's composition style at work, making it a neat coincidence. The Scope Shot subgame has a few remixes of songs from Kirby Superstar. Fighting the Waddle Tank, you'll hear the boss battle theme, the Gourmet Race opening theme when fighting Mecha Kawasaki, Actually, quick side note about this one. In the original version of this song, it cut off at this point. But in Return to Dreamland, it extends to a full version. This full version was previously in Kirby Superstar Ultra's special blooper reel movie. But it was actually first heard in the Japanese version of the anime, in the episode Ultimate Iron Man Cook Osaka. Anyways, back to Scope Shot. During Phase 1 of Robo DDD, you'll hear the exact same arrangement of DDD's theme from Kirby Superstar, and a remix of Heavy Lobster's theme from Superstar Ultra during Phase 2. The object of this subgame is to obliterate the armor of all these mechs, revealing their skeletal insides. And as I touched upon earlier, this could possibly be a leftover idea stemming from this piece of HRD3 concept art. Another minor detail here is that Kabula, in her Superstar Ultra design, makes a cameo appearance in the background, and can be shot for bonus points. Another set of extras in the game are the copyability challenge stages. As you could guess, these test your skills with different copy abilities and stages designed around their quirks. The final one on the list is actually the item challenge though, which instead focuses on Kirby's regular movesets and the many handheld items found throughout the game. The inclusion of said items is actually an interesting point about Return to Dreamland, as not many Kirby games before it really had any. However, Kirby's Dream Land did feature them prominently, and it being Kirby's first game featured plain old Kirby without any copy abilities. Knowing these points, maybe that's something that influenced the item challenge. Not to mention, this challenge stage's background song is unique, being Green Greens, a song that originated from Kirby's Dream Land. Here's something probably not many people have seen, the elusive Game Over screen. It borrows elements from ones in past games, as you'd expect, like Sleep Kirby sleeping away and the little hand that messes with him. But I'd say this one is most similar to the Game Over screen of Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland. When continuing the game, the hand will pester Kirby to wake up and get going, not unlike in other Kirby games. But if you choose to end the game, the hand will try to wake Kirby again, only to be sucked up and will struggle to get out. These actions are replicated in Return to Dreamland. Now let's talk about the true arena. It's a tougher version of the arena that features bosses from Extra Mode, and is another Kumazaki tradition, first appearing in Kirby Superstar Ultra. In that game, the waiting rooms before the final 4 bosses, appropriately called the Last 4, would have a darker atmosphere and eerie music. While Return to Dreamland doesn't have the Last 4 by name, this change of scenery in the waiting rooms is carried over when there are 4 rounds left, and even plays this ominous arrangement of the Iceberg map theme from Kirby's Dream Land 3. Perhaps one of the bigger surprises in the game is the boss fight against Galactonite, returning from Kirby Superstar Ultra, exclusive to the true arena. Upon entering the battlefield, he'll descend from inside a crystal, the same one from Superstar Ultra has been told that he's been sealed in, and then strike his signature pose. Of course, he has his rockin' theme song in the second half of the fight too. The fight itself plays like how you would expect from Galactonite, with some returning attacks. And some new ones. But the only huge difference is that he'd rather stand on the ground during combat instead of constantly hovering like in Superstar Ultra. The overall look of his battleground, especially this hexagonal ground, is reminiscent to that of Dark Star from Kirby 64 too. When you beat the true arena after 100%ing the whole game, you'll be treated to a special little video called Kirby Master, a quick stage show performed by the gang to celebrate your accomplishments. this has become somewhat of another Kumazaki tradition, appearing first in Superstar Ultra when you reach 100% too. As you can see, the one in Return to Dreamland is practically identical to that of the DS games, even including marks in the audience. Finally, to wrap this whole video up, let's talk about copy abilities and multiplayer. Copy abilities in Return to Dreamland work like how they do in Kirby Superstar. Some have the exact same moveset, some have been given additional moves, and others of new and old that weren't in Superstar have been given new moves to match the others. I won't be going over all of the abilities, of course, but a few of them hold some interesting references. Let's start with Stone Kirby, an ability that holds a heap of cameos. Starting in Kirby Superstar, Stone Kirby could transform into multiple different statues and rocks, and this feature is brought back in Return to Dreamland. Some formations make a direct return: the regular stone form, a Kirby statue, a rounded star block, the Macho Man, and an 8-ton weight. Superstar Ultra added a few new forms to the mix not found in the original, and back in Return to Dreamland are the Fist, statues of Rick, Q, and Kain, now combined into one, the golden HAL Laboratorial logo, and Mount Fuji with an added building. The building in question actually seems to be based on one of HAL Laboratory's research and development centers. It's located in the Yamanashi Prefecture of Japan, an area that overlooks Mount Fuji, and you can see the similarities for yourself. Completely new stone forms include a star block, the Dragoon Star from Kirby Air Ride, Marks bouncing on his ball, Wham Bam Rock, the masks and wings of Meta Knight and Galacta Knight, a statue depicting the Star Rod, the magical paintbrush from Kirby Canvas Curse, and the Triple Star Cane from Kirby Squeak Squad, and the Pixel Kirby. Stone Kirby also received a new melee punch attack, with a fist that could remind you of Wham Bam Rocks. Needle Kirby! This is one ability that wasn't in Superstar, but still received a few new moves in Return to Dreamland that all have roots in Kirby history. One attack is the Mega Needle, which mimics the behavior of ticks, another enemy that grants a needle ability, first appearing in Kirby's Dreamland 3. Another is the Rolling Needle, which is similar to how Togezo and Needlelouse attack. Needle Kirby can also shoot his spines in all directions with the Needle Burst attack, which is similar to the Needle ability combined with Choo Choo from Kirby's Dreamland 3. Finally, you can cling to walls and ceilings with the ability, a feature that was first introduced in Kirby 64. Spark Kirby received a huge upgrade. Previously only having the Spark attack, Spark in Return to Dreamland is essentially a combination of Spark and Plasma from past games. The regular attack is still the Spark attack, but mashing the D-pad or shaking the Wii Remote builds up different levels of power, just like Plasma, and is able to shoot a Spark Arrow, Spark Laser, and Spark Wave. Of course, also like Plasma, having power built up puts a barrier around Kirby. As for brand new attacks, Spark can summon a Bolt of Lightning with the new Thunderbolt attack, which is similar to Spark Kirby combined with Ku from Kirby's Dreamland 2, and more accurately, Dreamland 3. The Upward Bolt is also a property the ability had in Canvas Curse. And speaking of properties carrying over from Canvas Curse, the Beam ability in that game will circle all around Kirby, and holding down the attack will make him stay still with it constantly revolving around him. Beam in Return to Dreamland got the Revolution Beam attack, which allows Kirby to guide the beam in a complete circle while suspended in midair. It's pretty common knowledge that Sword Kirby has a lot of similarities to Link from the Legend of Zelda series. Starting in Kirby Superstar, Sword Kirby received a floppy green Link-like cap, and could shoot sword beams when at full health. In Return to Dreamland, the ability gains a spin slash attack. Another one of Link's moves. Crash and Mike are two abilities that have never had hats in games before Return to Dreamland. While Crash did have a hat in the anime in the form of this elaborate headdress, this became his new proper in-game hat. Mike, on the other hand, has certainly been depicted wearing headphones and other hats, but never actually wore them unless an attack was used. From Return to Dreamland onwards, he'll wear headphones even when moving around. Another interesting thing about Mike is the way Kirby screams into the microphone. In most games Mike has been in, this iconic noise would be part of it. However, Nightmare in Dreamland decided to drop this noise in favor of new voice clips more in line with Kirby's actual voice. Return to Dreamland does this as well, just with updated voices. Although you'd still be able to hear his deep, bassy voice when doing the encore attack. Snowball Kirby traps enemies in the snowball and sends them flying when it explodes, which could draw some inspiration from the double ice ability from Kirby 64. Monster Flame Kirby sweeps the screen with these bursts of dragon-faced fire. Intentional or not, this could remind you of the flame dragons from Kirby Air Ride, found in magma flows, and the heat top area of City Trial. Speaking of Kirby Air Ride, Sleep Kirby has a purple hat with yellow polka dots in the game, making it unique from all of its other appearances, where it's a greenish hue with white or yellow polka dots. That is, until Return to Dreamland and onward, where the purple hat has become the new regular. Of course, Kirby isn't the only playable character in this game. King Dedede and Meta Knight are both playable, as is Waddle Dee. This bandana-clad Waddle Dee has previously appeared in Kirby Superstar's Megaton Punch subgame, and in Kirby Superstar Ultra, taking on a bigger role. Neither of these games saw him using a spear as a weapon, though. In fact, spear Waddle Dees seem to have originated from the Kirby Right Back At Ya anime, where Waddle Dees served as guards for King Dedede and often had spears. The games would introduce spear Waddle Dees afterwards, and as Superstar Ultra depicted Bandana Waddle Dee as Dedede's most faithful subject, it's only natural that he'd learn to use the spear at some point too, even if some Waddle Dees beat him to the punch. Playing as the other guys is comparable to using their respective copy abilities. King Dedede has all the attacks of Hammer Kirby. Waddle Dee might just be what created Spear Kirby in the first place with what I just talked about. Meta Knight is a little special though. He can be seen as sort of a combination of the sword and wing abilities, as he has similar attacks to both of them. Being part wing, he has the shuttle loop attack, but with some interesting new properties. He can use it without the need of an enemy, and when pulled off, he'll glide around for a while. This is almost certainly lifted straight from Super Smash Bros. Brawl, as Meta Knight's recovery move, the shuttle loop, sends him gliding as well. While Return to Dreamland boasts its 4-player multiplayer as a main point, it actually isn't the first main Kirby game to have it. Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland allowed 4 players to link up and each play as their own Kirby, either pink, red, yellow, or green. These 4-colored Kirbys are also featured much more prominently in Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, serving as the main story and gameplay features. If you don't want to play as the other guys in Return to Dreamland, you can still play as different colored Kirbys. This time though, the team of 4 is a little different. Of course, pink and yellow are here as always, but red has been dropped in favor of blue. Green Kirby also differs a little bit from before, as his shoes are now a darker green instead of orangey brown, looking more like the green Kirby from Kirby Air Ride. One last point I'd like to make about multiplayer is that when a friend gets KO'd, you'll hear this upsetting tune. At first you might just brush it off as a truncated version of the regular KO jingle, but check this out. When playing a minigame in Kirby's Dream Land 3, pick an incorrect answer and you'll hear this. Sounds like we've got a better match now. This sound effect was also used in the Paint Panic subgame in Kirby Canvas Curse. Now, admittedly, these last few references are a bit of a stretch, but hey, it's fun to make connections whether intentional or not, so I'm gonna go all out. Flare Beam Kirby is a super ability that's all about remote controlling a big ball of beam. While it's more likely to be based off of Spark Kirby combined with Pitch from Kirby's Dream Land 3, considering its loose control, it reminded me of Pikachu's Final Smash, Volt Tackle from Super Smash Bros. Brawl. With what I just talked about with Meta Knight, the reference might not be entirely out of the question, right? Another possible Brawl reference can be found in Water Kirby's running attack, the Wave Surf, which could have been influenced by Piplup's Surf Attack. Water Kirby also has an attack called the Water Crown. Kirby executes this deadly attack by splashing some water on the ground. Now this one is certainly a coincidence and probably just shows my useless Kirby knowledge more than anything, but there's this glitch you can pull off in Kirby's Adventure. When you drop an ability that doesn't use a weapon and get hit by an enemy at the same time, you'll get a splash ability. Press the B button and a splash of water will appear at Kirby's feet, but it doesn't do anything besides that. I mean, hey, this is what I thought when I used the attack for the first time. So, there you have it. I've scoured every inch of this game and found loads upon loads of Kirby references, trivia, discoveries, and goodness. Despite my efforts though, I wouldn't be surprised if there's even more than what I dug up still hiding in there. But with the sheer amount of stuff I have shown you, I hope you've come to realize how brilliantly crafted Kirby's Return to Dreamland is. Not only is it a solid and incredibly polished game as a whole, but it's also a huge love letter to longtime Kirby fans. And being one myself, I wanted to share my appreciation with the world. It's my favorite Kirby game for a reason. Kumazaki and his team clearly made this game with a lot of love, and they did their research to make it a true celebration of the Kirby series as a whole. It isn't just Return to Dreamland that's filled to the brim with these references, though. You can bet that the games that follow it carry the torch as well. Other modern Kirby games like Triple Deluxe, Planet Robobot, and especially Star Allies are just crawling with them, so maybe I'll just have to bust out my useless Kirby knowledge again in the future. But hey, thanks for hearing me talk until the end. This video is actually something I've really wanted to make ever since the game first came out back in 2011. And altogether it took over 2 years to make, so I'm glad that I finally saw it through and made it happen. These are actually the very original notes I made way back when. I'd like to thank these people for contributing. My good buddy AltiZeta for recording all the footage of the DS Kirby games you saw in the video, and giving me some great feedback throughout the editing process. Nimend for providing a lot of info about the GameCube Kirby game, which by the way you can read even more about in his Reddit posts at a link in the description. Meteors for providing the scans of the GameCube Kirby game concept art. Kirby Wiki for a couple tidbits I hadn't previously known about. The Cutting Room Floor for some info about some stuff hidden in the game's files. Game Explain for the juicy E3 footage, which again is linked in the description if you want to watch more. And finally, my patrons who support me on Patreon for sticking with me and supporting what I love doing. If you like this video, consider subscribing to me. I definitely want to do more of these videos about other Kirby games if I ever have the time. I'm also primarily an artist and make cool time-lapse drawing videos of my artwork, like this piece I drew a few years ago of Return to Dreamland, and this one of Star Allies. But thanks again for tuning in and watching this till the end. It really means a lot.